Makoto was a risless idiot who was isekai'd as a hero until a goddess sees his ugly face and banishes him. However, when he discovers his hidden powers, he teams up with powerful monster girls who will do anything to help him get revenge. One evening, Makoto was suddenly teleported to a void where a god named Tsukiyomi told him he was about to be isekai'd as a hero in a fantasy world. When Makoto asked why he was chosen without the knowledge of Truck-kun, Tsukiyomi explained that his parents already signed a contract, so he had no choice but to oblige. As compensation, he granted Makoto an ability to help him survive, but just then, Makoto started fading away. Tsukiyomi then explained that he was being summoned by the goddess of the fantasy world with a ton of attitude problems. He begged him to glaze her so she wouldn't flex her powers on him. When he arrived at her palace, she was about to begin the cliché hero welcome speech, only to stop and burst out laughing at his monkey face. She claimed his face made even the demi-humans look like Kim Kardashian, so she told him to beat it. As he protested, she decided to grant him an useless skill that lets him speak demi-human language. She then dropped him at the edge of the world hoping he'd die, but Tsukiyomi saved the day by freezing time. He revealed that Makoto wouldn't have died from the fall since summoned heroes had superpowers, and as compensation for how the goddess treated him, Tsukiyomi granted him an extra ability before disappearing. After Tsukiyomi faded away, Makoto pulled a superhero landing and walked around the mountains for days, but he couldn't find anyone around. Just when he was about to give up, he heard a voice crying for help, so he ran faster than the Flash and saw a double-headed dog attacking a demihuman. When the monster charged at him, he easily dodged its attacks and finished it off with a Liu Kang kick that reduced the mutt to a bloody mess. Afterwards, he tried to riz up Piglet-chan, but she was terrified by his gorilla strength, so he gaslighted her until she finally agreed to speak with him. She introduced herself as Emma and informed him that she was heading to sacrifice herself to a dragon named Shin to improve her land's farming situation. Out of gratitude, she decided to postpone her sacrifice and take him to a camp where he could wash off the grime from his body and relax. When they arrived at the camp, Emma served him some food, and when Makoto noticed her magically levitating some plates, he asked her to teach him magic. During their magic lesson, she summoned a fireball, and Makoto was able to mimic her incantations thanks to his language skill, allowing him to summon his own fireball. When she explained that magic worked with imagination, Makoto suddenly became a better firebender than Zuko as he blasted the wall with his flames. Seeing this, Emma was stunned by his skill, and she assumed he must be above level 300, so she decided to perform an assessment test to find out. Unfortunately, the test revealed that Makoto was a level 1 fraud, which got him bummed out, so she decided to teach him some more spells to cheer him up. The next morning, Emma noticed that Makoto was nowhere to be found, but she found a note where he thanked her for teaching him magic spells and informed her that he'd gone to face Shin so she wouldn't have to sacrifice herself. When Makoto got to the peak of the mountain, he wanted to warm up by practicing his new magic, so he created an arrow which he fired randomly, but it ended up hitting a shrine and creating a huge explosion. As he ran to the shrine, he saw his spell had barbecued some monsters, so he apologized for the mess he'd caused. However, the dying monster called him a madman, adding that he was as good as dead for destroying the Great Shin Shrine. After he crumbled away, a mist immediately covered the area, and Makoto was ambushed by Shin, who took the form of a large green dragon. While he evaded her attack, he noticed the mist was getting thicker, so he activated his observation haki, allowing him to maneuver and dodge more accurately. When Makoto summoned some fireballs, Shin mocked the Temu Fire Lord for trying to use a basic spell on her. However, the flame attack ended up doing major damage to her, so she screamed in pain and was shocked as she was supposed to be fire resistant. Following that, Makoto spammed some backy moves one after the other, and this stunned her even more because she thought she was invincible. To stop him, she trapped him in an illusory barrier where his crush from school asked him out, but the virgin couldn't gather his thoughts because he was distracted by her heavy milk factories.
Nice.
As the conversation progressed, Makoto discovered some inconsistencies in Shin's genjutsu that allowed him to snap out of it, and he also figured out the nature of the power that Tsukuyomi gave him. Apparently, it allowed him to create a semicircular area around himself and manipulate the space inside of it to make himself stronger. Using this ability, he broke through the barrier easily and prepared to feed Shin some knuckle sandwiches. However, he noticed that the dragon was no longer hostile towards him, so he halted his attack. Shin then explained that Makoto had some fascinating memories of samurais she was intrigued by, so she wanted to accompany him on his journey to learn more about them. With the intention of becoming his master, she baited him into performing a pact with her, where their roles would be determined by their power level. However, during the ritual, she found out the hard way that Makoto was stronger than Goku, and he overpowered her so badly that she ended up becoming his slave. She then transformed into a human form, surprising Makoto, who wondered why she was wearing a $5 Zoro cosplay, but she revealed that she was a samurai. When she asked if something was bothering him, Makoto explained that her current form was a wrench because he was hoping to ride on the back of a dragon. She explained that in the contract they were in, the weaker creature usually took the form of the dominant one. But Makoto complained that he didn't like being dominant. When she started blurting some nonsense about swords and samurai warriors, he realized that the part of his memories that got her hooked was the samurai shows he binged. He didn't have much of a problem with her Edo-era obsession, but the plot reveal in her outfit was about to give him a nosebleed, so he begged her to change her looks. However, she gave him permission to fantasize about her milk factories as much as he wanted, and her masculine aura somehow turned him off. She then created a mist and revealed that the land beyond the mist was a demiplane which she controlled. When he asked if it was an illusion, she explained that it was a space they could enter and exit through mist gates, and invited him to come in with her. After walking through the mist, he was surprised that the land in front of him was a beautiful grass field. But when he asked Shin where they were, she said she had no idea. She was surprised that her demiplane had evolved from the void it used to be, and when Makoto handed her a persimmon from one of the trees, she instantly loved it. When Makoto realized that there were a lot of familiar plants around, he scanned the area and freaked out when he realized how huge it was. He also figured out that the trashy goddess couldn't mess with him there, since it could only be assessed through Shin's mist gates. When he pitched the idea of building a city there, Shin got interested, but he changed the subject by asking if she had anything to do with the Highland Orc sacrifices. She had no idea what it even meant, so he asked her to come with him back to the Orc village and clear up the misunderstanding. When they returned to the normal realm, Emma rushed towards Makoto and warned him that it would be too reckless to fight Shin. However, Shin interrupted her by blabbing about how Makoto punched her during the battle, and this left Emma confused. Seeing this, Shin explained that she formed a contract with Makoto, which made him her master because she was fascinated with him. Emma was still frozen in disbelief, so she handed her a bunch of scales that came off during the fight. When Shin asked if she believed her, her terrifying aura made Emma certain she was the dragon god, causing her to faint. Later that evening, Emma asked Makoto where Shin was during their welcome party, and he replied that she'd gone to bed because she had a lot to drink. With tears in her eyes, she thanked Makoto for saving her village, and he told her it was no big deal before thanking her for her magic lessons. The next day, Makoto was stunned when he saw that all the orcs had packed their bags, so the orc leader explained that they accepted Shin's offer to live in her sanctuary. When Makoto asked her what she was thinking, she explained that it was their contract that upgraded the demiplane and reminded him of his plan to build a town there. To calm his nerves, she assured him that everything would be fine because she'd thrown in an assortment of creatures that live around there. However, Makoto angrily asked how they'd handle things if some dangerous monsters appeared in the area. Just then, a lowly version of Shin showed up and assured him that she'd fight off any monsters that attacked the orcs. He freaked out because he thought he'd somehow made an offspring with Shin. But she explained that it was a fragment of herself. When Makoto asked the orcs if they were sure of their decision, Emma said they were all determined to support him in the new city. However, he was worried that they'd have nowhere to live in the demiplane. So Shin transported the orc town into her sanctuary using mist magic. Several days later, Makoto was practicing magic, and he realized that he had the strongest affinity for water among the 5 elements. However, his practice session was interrupted by Shin, who started fawning over the historical dramas she was watching in his mind. After she left to gather some materials, Makoto saw a floating memory of his parents, and he made it his new goal to follow the path they took. Elsewhere, an old dwarf was fighting for his life, as he was being attacked by a huge spider monster called the Black Disaster. Back at the village, some orcs complained to Makoto that a large tree was too hard for them to cut down. So he flexed his powers by cutting it down easily. When one of them showed him his injury, Makoto healed him instantly. He then pointed out that Makoto's healing didn't expel mana, causing him to realize that he had his own personal power system called Kai. However, Kai couldn't heal his own injuries, so he applied a bandage to his injured hand. Just then, Shin returned holding the old dwarf, and she informed him that the demiplane was under attack by a peculiar creature. When the Black Disaster appeared, Makoto asked Shin to help him face it, but she claimed that she was too busy taking care of the injured man. They explained to Makoto that the Black Disaster was an ancient creature that was so hungry that it could eat anything, and Shin revealed that she'd fought it before. After deploying his power field, Makoto managed to slice off one of its legs, but before he could finish it off, it regenerated and started attacking him. Makoto then fired a flaming arrow at the monster, and followed it up with a brutal flame spell, but this only got the monster hyped up. When Makoto spammed even more flame attacks at it, the spider regenerated and impaled him multiple times. It tried to eat him, but Makoto suddenly went into rage mode and fired a flurry of intense flame blasts at the spider before finishing it off with a water arrow. However, the spider regenerated and started simping for Makoto, so Shin kicked her away and gaslighted her until she agreed to form a contract with Makoto as well. When Makoto woke up, the black spider greeted him in her human form, and Makoto wondered why an S-tier baddie was suddenly in front of him. Some hours earlier, Shin was healing Makoto's injuries, and she was surprised that he had no aptitude for healing magic. When Emma offered to help out, she swore that she wouldn't leave a single scratch left on her master's body, and pushed her healing magic even further. In the present, Spider-Girl narrated these events to Makoto, and he remarked that Emma was an incredible wizard before asking who she was. She introduced herself and said she gained that form because of their contract, but Makoto was stunned because he thought contracts required the consent of both parties. However, she gave him permission to raid her secret tunnel, and this made him realize that he may have been put in the freakiest isekai world ever. When Shin and the old dwarf walked into the room, Makoto complained about the contract that was formed without his knowledge. However, Shin explained that it was better than having a spider following him around to get a taste of his popsicle. She then revealed that the old dwarf was from an ancient subrace of dwarves who produced sacred and noble artifacts, which earned them the distinction of Elder. The man introduced himself as Baron, the elder dwarf, and thanked him for saving his village from the spider. When Baron asked Makoto to let his clan move into their land, Makoto didn't even finish hearing his sales pitch before agreeing. However, Shin stipulated that he had to help out at farm work, pay his taxes, and acknowledge Makoto as his supreme ruler to keep staying in the land. Baron agreed and claimed that it would take 2 days for him to bring his people there, so Shin handed him a present to give to his folks. When he saw that it was greater dragon scales, he freaked out, and Shin whispered some historical drama artifacts that she wanted him to make for her in return. Some hours later, Makoto went outside the demiplane to search for human settlements, and this was something he did every day to trace his parents' path. When he spotted a human village, he got excited to explore it. But before he could move ahead, Shin showed up and said she had a special request for him. After returning to the demiplane, she told Makoto that herself and the Spider Lady needed names, and explained that the citizens didn't know what to call them without names. Bro started suggesting basic names for the spider, so she grabbed his arm and angrily asked him to give her a beautiful name. However, Shin separated them and demanded to be named first, so Makoto brainstormed for a bit before naming her Tamo. Since she was confused, he explained that Tamo was the name of a valiant female samurai he knew, and this made her immediately accept the name. When Makoto pointed out that she was glowing, she explained that getting named by her master increased her strength, so he scolded her for not telling him earlier. Spider Girl then asked for her name, so he started brainstorming again. When he remembered how hungry and tenacious she was during their fight, he gave her the name Mio, and she instantly fell in love with the name. Some hours later, Makoto was in a state of shock as he stood on a stage with his maidens in front of several demi-human species which he'd never seen before. Tamo and Mio introduced themselves to the crowd using their new names, and the people cheered in response. The simp duo then started a poll to determine which royal term would be best suited to call Makoto, and it was decided that Makoto would now be called Young Master. When Bro started nagging, they calmed him down by telling him that it was the result of a democratic vote, but he still urged them to call him by his given name. However, he noticed that everyone around was staring at him with puppy eyes, so he agreed to answer the name Young Master, and this made everyone cheer for him. Shortly after, Baron introduced Makoto to the village chief of the Elder Dwarves, Eld, who asked if he was charged with a mission from the goddess. Immediately he mentioned Goddess. Makoto claimed he'd never receive a mission from her, and started ranting about all the bad things she did to him. Eld said he was relieved to hear that because his opinions differ from those of the goddess, and he agreed to align himself with Makoto. Tamo then introduced an army of mist lizards as her followers, and this made Makoto insecure, so she assured him that they'd serve him as well. Just then, Mio introduced her followers, which were a group of spider monsters called Alki, and showed off their regenerative abilities before ordering them to support Makoto. Afterwards, Makoto ordered all the races to live peacefully and immediately head out to the human realm because he was desperate to meet some actual people. He suddenly found a beautiful human girl, but when he approached her, his negative aura scared her off. When he arrived at the human city gate, he saw that the people had armed themselves to face him. Before he could explain himself, they started firing arrows at him, causing him to run away. He shielded himself from the arrows using a force field and got angry when he realized the humans' negative reaction towards him was caused by the goddess. When he told the others about it, they explained that the humans were scared because of his terrifying aura, and Emma revealed that it was possible to suppress mana. Because of this, he decided to learn human language and find a mana-suppressing item as well as a mask to cover his looks. 1 month later, he learned how to manifest human language from his fingertips, and a merchant brought him a ring which successfully suppressed his mana. Since his disguise was now complete, he successfully entered the human town with the girls, and they soon arrived at a guild hall. There, the girls were assessed and discovered to be the highest-ranking adventurers they'd ever seen with a level of over 1,000. However, when Makoto checked his rank, it was unfortunately still as low as it was before. That evening, Makoto and Mio were strolling through town when they were suddenly approached by a strange girl. As the girl struggled to speak, Makoto realized that she wasn't lost, so he asked Mio to handle the situation. However, Mio was so harsh with her questioning that the girl started crying, so Makoto called her back to give her a smack on the head. She complained that the girl ruined sweet time with him, but Makoto grabbed her by the nose while warning her not to threaten the girl, and this made the girl laugh. Seeing this, Makoto apologized for scaring her and asked what she was doing there. His negative riz made her burst into tears, and she said she had a special request for them. As she cried, Mio asked the girl to get away from them, but Makoto decided to take her back to the inn without knowing that an adventurer was secretly watching them. At the inn, the girl introduced herself as Rinan and revealed that she and her sister were traveling together but ended up settling in that town. She then informed them that her sister had been missing for a month and added that she was kicked out of the home they were renting before bursting into tears again. Mio presumed that she got caught up in some kind of trouble, and similarly, Makoto finally realized why the town, Zetsuya, had been feeling off since he moved in. Meanwhile, some bandits tried to rob their wagon, but Tomo was waiting right there for them. When they attacked her, she pulled out a sword to face them, and knocked out one of them with a brutal kick. When the others charged at her, she destroyed their weapons with a single slash. But surprisingly, their bodies ripped in half as well because of how sharp her blade was. One of the men ran away, and when Tomo tried to chase him, another assassin blocked her path, so she knocked him out and took him hostage instead. However, when she returned to the inn, Makoto scolded her for unaliving the hooligans and asked her to thank Mio for handling the aftermath. When he disarmed the hostage, 2 massive melons suddenly popped out of her chest. Beautiful! So he yelled at Tomo for not checking her gender before bringing her there. She explained that it would have made her look like a weirdo, but he kept scolding her until Rinon called for his attention. When she asked how Makoto suddenly became talkative, he tried to cover himself up by doing a Nezuko impression, but she mocked him for being cringe. Using his projection writing, he asked her to go eat some leftover food in the other room, but Tomo freaked out when she realized he was casually giving away her food. He also offered her a spare bed to sleep on, and this made Tomo lose her mind even more because it was her bed he was giving away. After thanking him, she showed him a sketch of her sister which she drew, and he instantly realized that something was off about it. When Mio returned, she saw Makoto looking through the memories of their hostage, and immediately noticed that something was off. He revealed that the thieves that attacked them were at the guild, and added that they were connected to Rinon somehow. As she looked at the sketch of Rinon's sister, Makoto revealed that she'd been taken hostage by the assassins in a particular location, and asked her to go find her there. Mio said there was no need to hurry, but Makoto begged her with a dark look in his eyes, so Tomo offered to accompany Mio on this side quest while he looked over Rinon. After they left, Makoto stared at the picture again, and realized that Rinon's sister looked exactly like his school crush, Heisukawa. At the same time, the girls were walking through the street while talking about how unusually dark Makoto was acting during his investigation. When Mio assumed that the woman in the image was connected to him somehow, Tomo said it was impossible since he had no friends in that world. Tomo then said they needed to find the missing girl quickly so that Makoto would snap out of the dark mood, and Mio agreed, so moved forward to get it done. As Makoto and Rinon moved through the city, he assured her that his girls would find her sister, so she thanked him. Before her sister was kidnapped, Rinon was mad because they were in debt again, but her sister assured her that she'd earn it back by adventuring hard. However, she came back one day looking like she just fought Sukuna and asked Rinon to head to another town called Saige because she needed to work to pay off her debt. Sometime later, Rinon was counting the last coins she had when she heard some ruffians plotting to kidnap her to make up for sister's debt. This made her run as fast as she could until she ran into a sus adventurer who claimed that she could never escape him. Back in the present, Rinon's sister was lying unconscious in a room, thinking about how she came from a family of adventurers. One of her relatives was once defeated in a battle against a powerful monster and lost their family's treasured short sword. Because of this, Rinon's sister entered the wasteland in the far corner of the world to find it. As she lay helplessly on the floor, she apologized to Rinon for dying a fraud. But then she spotted Tomo and Mio. When Mio realized that she'd been used as a guinea pig for magical experiments, she healed her and melted the door open using her magic. As they walked away with her, they were approached by a man who Rinon's sister identified as Zetsuya's strongest adventurer, Mills. Meanwhile, Makoto and Rinon arrived at the inn, but she suddenly left him to meet up with an assassin in a dark alley. Using his observation Kai, he heard the enemy ordering Rinon to steal from him in exchange for her sister's safety, so he decided to improve the situation in the town. At the same time, Mills revealed himself to be the boss of the evil adventurers, and asked Mio and Tomo to join him, but they immediately declined. When he insulted Makoto, they tried to destroy him with powerful attacks, but he blocked with a magic barrier. However, Tomo shattered the barrier, and both girls went on a rampage, decimating the entire group of enemy adventurers with ease. Mills tried to hold Rinon's sister hostage, but they punched him away and proceeded to destroy the town with their powers in a meaningless beef to see who was stronger. When they returned to the inn, Rinnon's sister, Toa, thanked them, and after she fell asleep, Makoto punished the girls for destroying the city. The next day, Makoto and the girls boarded a carriage with the former captives of Mills, and they all made their way to the next village, Saige. A while later, the guild receptionist freaked out when she heard that Zetsuya was destroyed, and one of the former captives told her it was a horde of monsters that leveled the town. Makoto was relieved because the adventurer's memories had been altered using Tamo's power, with the exception of Rinnon and Toa. However, he noticed that Mio was pouting over the fact that he'd added 2 more girls to the team. When the receptionist asked if there were still monsters in Zetsuya, the adventurer said Mio and Tamo chased all of them away with their level 1000 plus abilities. Makoto told the receptionist they were registered as adventurers in Zetsuya, but she informed him that they'd have to re-register in Saige since their information wasn't sent from Zetsuya before its destruction. He then approached Tamo and baited her into accepting a task to become a knight-errant. After she left to train, Mio celebrated the fact that she'd finally get some alone time with Makoto, but she ended up taking a field trip with Makoto and the rest of the girls. Just then, Makoto sensed some monstrous insects in the path ahead, so he sent Mio to take care of them. When she confronted these bugs, it only took one swing of her fan to reduce them all to scraps, and everyone praised her for being just as powerful as Gojo. After the battle, Makoto suggested moving ahead, but Toa said it would be best to collect materials from the monsters they defeated since they were valuable. Makoto tried to remind her that the road ahead was still long, but then he noticed her elite milk packs and got so charmed that he asked her to do as she pleased. When he noticed that Rinnon and Mio were giving him the stink eye, he explained that he was only trying to learn the basics of gathering materials. Things got messy when Toa ripped open a bug's head, and Makoto was creeped out by this because she was performing barbaric acts while wearing Hoskawa's face. After a few days of traveling, they arrived at an area close to Saige where they saw some rare bug monsters called Ruby Eyes in front of them. As Mio stood up to handle the situation, the others warned her not to do much damage to the creature, so she gave up and asked Makoto to handle it instead. Makoto was surprised, so she explained that it was a hassle because the idiots in the back seat kept making stressful demands of her during attacks. When Makoto asked for the Ruby Eye's weak spot, Toa said it was in their abdomen, and added that it was a difficult spot to hit. However, Makoto marched forward and proved to be a more awesome archer than Green Arrow, as he took down the Ruby Eyes one by one. After the battle, the others glazed Makoto for his archery skills and immediately rushed to scavenge some materials from the monsters' corpses. When they arrived at Saige, Makoto successfully re-registered as an adventurer, and he was handed an identity card which stated that he was still at level 1. This disappointed him because he thought soloing the so-called rare bee monsters would raise his level. Afterwards, he looked through the quest board and discovered a special rank quest. As he read through the quest sheet, he saw that it was from a client called the Rembrandt Trading Company, who were looking for the eyes of the Ruby Eyes. Just then, Toa came by to thank him for helping her level up during the journey, and he asked her to split the materials with him. During the material division, Makoto was given one of each material and 12 Ruby Eyes. When he apologized for taking the rarest material, Toa said it was alright because he was the one who defeated them. Realizing that it was time to say goodbye, everyone started acting gloomy, so Makoto suggested celebrating their journey together. This made everyone cheer up, and Toa said she'd choose the restaurant before exchanging card information with him for contact. That evening, Makoto and Mio arrived at the butcher shop, which Toa chose for their party, and the first thing he noticed was a huge manga-style meat on the table. After sharing a toast with the gang, Makoto started feasting on the meat, and he was really impressed by how delicious it tasted. As he ate, one of his adventurer friends named Lusa started asking him questions about his archery skills. Before he could respond, an alchemy meister on the group named Hazel, who was already wasted, interrupted and asked him to train together sometime. As Makoto tried to answer him, A dwarf adventurer in the group named Ranina brought some more drinks for them and asked to arm wrestle him. When their arm wrestling match began, Makoto easily defeated her anyway, and Mio brought some more food for them to celebrate. Soon after, Makoto told Toa about the Rembrandt Trading Company job, and she warned him that bad things happened to people who accepted jobs from them. The next morning, they returned to the demoplane where they reunited with Chibai Tamo and Emma. As they walked ahead, Emma explained that all the creatures were working together to construct different parts of the city, and the orcs were specifically building his castle. He worried that it would take up a lot of manpower and time, but Emma said it was fine because they were using his memories as a construction map. When he asked about Tamo, Emma said she hadn't heard from her. But their conversation was interrupted when Eld showed up to talk to Makoto. He presented Makoto with some elite armor, but Makoto rejected the low-budget Igris cosplays and went for a coat made by the same guy who made his ring, Rugui. After he put it on, Rugui explained that it provided elite defense, and he switched the coat to a red form, which prioritized mobility over defense. However, the suit got destroyed because of the excess mana it absorbed from Makoto, so Rugus promised to make him a better one. Afterwards, Makoto met some Alk named Akina, Hokuto and Minato, who gave him some deadly crops they gathered. The next day, Makoto arrived at the Rembrandt Trading Company with enthusiasm, but the boss fired him immediately. Meanwhile, a guy asked the receptionist about the person who took the Rembrandt job, and the receptionist gave a description of Makoto which made him concerned. At the Rembrandt Trading Company, the group head named Patrick asked Makoto why he hadn't heard of him despite being well versed with adventurers. Makoto replied that he was an E-ranker who was yet to take his first job, adding that he was planning to establish his own business eventually and join the Merchants Guild. Patrick realized that Makoto's plan was to establish a connection with his company, so he told Makoto that he had nothing else to tell him. As Makoto sat quietly, Patrick said he was disappointed in him for not researching the ruby eyes more thoroughly, and Makoto felt relieved because it was the reaction he expected. Patrick then claimed that there was no way anyone on Makoto's level could catch a rare monster like ruby eyes, but Makoto dropped the eyes right on the table. This left Patrick astonished, and he apologized for doubting Makoto. When Makoto asked why he needed the eyes, Patrick said they intended to create a special medicine called ambrosia that could cure the cursed disease his wife and daughters suffer from, which was caused by a witch doctor's ritual. His butler added that it was a level 8 cursed disease, which meant they'd die unless some ambrosia is administered to them. Makoto asked to be present when the drug was made, and when Patrick asked why, he explained that he'd come with an alchemy meister who could save them time. This pleased Patrick as he'd felt nothing but despair so far during this quest, and he claimed that he'd taken the first step to solving his problem. When Makoto asked what he meant, he said it required 2 eyes to make enough medicine for one person, so Makoto gave him 6 ruby eyes to save everyone in his family. Patrick and his butler, Morris, immediately started tearing up, and soon other employees of the company rushed into the room to celebrate with them. The heartwarming sight put a smile on Makoto's face, and he was given a receipt by Patrick, who informed him that the medicine would be made on another day. When Makoto arrived at the Merchants Guild, the receptionist informed him that he had to pass 2 tests to join the guild, so he asked for some more info about the tests. She revealed that the tests could be taken at any time and showed him a guild manual which he could use in preparing for the written test. She also stated that he'd be given a practical test if he passes the written test, where he'd be asked to gather some materials, which could either be easily acquired stuff or dangerous objects like monster parts. He'd be asked to demonstrate his economic strength if he passes both tests with either a deposit or annual dues, but if he fails, he'd be unable to take the test again for half a year. When he asked for a manual, she said it costs 2 gold pieces for one, and he freaked out because of how expensive it was. As an alternative, she suggested studying while working for a trading company, but Makoto rejected the offer and handed her some money to purchase a manual. A while later, Makoto finished memorizing the prohibited items and licensed products in the manual, and the test instructor walked in. When the test began, the instructor started gloating about how difficult his questions were, but he was stunned when Makoto finished in seconds. He accused Makoto of being nonchalant about his exam, but when he went through Makoto's answer sheets, he saw that Bro got a perfect score despite his quick finish time. For the item procurement test, he asked Makoto to pick a ball from a box, and when he did, he noticed that his ball looked weird. By the instructions, it meant that he had to get 4 materials including an Apple Watch, a brand new Tesla, an Omnitrix, and a Howl Fang. Hearing this, Makoto freaked out because he remembered the Howl Fang being mentioned as a difficult material. This made the scumbag instructor happy, and he informed Makoto that he was to bring these items or something of equal value to the guild within 3 days. When the instructor revealed that he had to be at least level 50 to get those items, Makoto remembered the people he traveled with were all at levels above 100. Since they weren't able to defeat the Ruby Eyes, he realized that the materials from those monsters were worth more than the items in the test. He then presented the materials from the Ruby Eyes as items of equal value, and the instructor freaked out before congratulating him for passing the exam with full marks. Elsewhere, Tamo defeated a bunch of powerful monsters and bragged about her knight-errantry. When she returned to the Demiplane, she feasted on the remains of the monster with her men until an orc came by to inform her that Mio was eating Makoto's memories. She ran to stop Mio only to meet her translating Makoto's memories into books, and the ladies discussed their plans to eat Makoto's sausage. The next day, Makoto returned to the Demiplane and ate some fruit with Chibai Tamo, who told him about how strange the weather was the past few days. Their conversation was interrupted when Tamo called him over for an emergency. But when he arrived there, he met the girls fighting over his gooning memories. After separating them, he gave Mio permission to watch some anime from his memories and scolded Tamo for loafing around. That night at the inn, the girls tried to tempt Makoto into jumping in bed with them, but he ignored them and rested on the sofa, where he suddenly got a text from Hazel. The next morning, he met Hazel, who was pleased to be joining him in making the ambrosia, and as they walked ahead, 2 adventurers in a dark alley plotted against them. Some time ago, the witch doctor was chained up after being beat up by Morris, but he still bragged about his curse, so Patrick gave Morris the go-ahead to cut his head off. In the present, Makoto and Hazel were seated in the Rembrandt Company headquarters, and Makoto apologized for not telling him the full story earlier. However, Hazel expressed his worries that he could get smoked if he gets on the company's bad side, and he got startled when he heard the door open. Just then, Patrick arrived with Morris and announced that preparations had been made before inviting them to the lab. When they got there, Morris informed them that everything they needed was on the table, and Hazel read an instruction manual which taught him how to create the drug. He was surprised that the process was short, so Morris explained that the medicine wasn't difficult to produce once the unique extraction process was finished. After drawing some inscriptions on the ground, Hazel said a prayer to the goddess which ticked Makoto off since it was his arch nemesis. When he noticed that Hazel wasn't syncing the magic properly, he aided him with his own magic. Hazel asked how his magic completed with an incomplete incantation, so Makoto gaslighted him into believing it was his imagination. When they started producing the drug, Morris explained that ruby eyes were used as substitutes because the ambrosia flowers were difficult to acquire. Hearing this, Makoto smiled as he realized that he could become an isekai Elon Musk if he manages to make the ambrosia flowers the prize product of his Kuzunoha trading company. Before long, Hazel completed a dose of the wondrous ambrosia drug and handed it to Morris, who immediately rushed out to give it to Patrick. When Hazel finished the other 2 drugs, he heaved a sigh of relief, but when Morris suddenly returned, the idiot accidentally launched them into the air. Seeing this, Makoto caught one of the drugs mid-air and used investigative Kai to locate the other falling drug before using water magic to launch himself towards it. Realizing that his hands wouldn't make it in time to catch the drug, Makoto used his back to cushion the fall. When Makoto asked Morris what was wrong, he took him to a room where they saw that Patrick had been injured in his arm. Patrick explained that his wife suddenly started pulling off Akaza's moves when he tried to administer the drug to her, and the guards were barely able to subdue her. Hearing this, Hazel revealed that it was caused by a hindrance woven into the cursed disease to prevent him from administering the medicine. Patrick then narrated how his wife's illness started out as a minor fever, but eventually transformed her into a monster from The Hobbit. As he drowned in misery, Makoto considered calling Toa's party or his two monster girls for help, but he changed his mind and asked Patrick to take him to his wife. He promised to restrain her long enough for the medicine to be administered, and instructed Hazel to make another dose of the drug using the remaining ingredients. Patrick doubted that a cannon fodder like him could restrain his cursed wife, but Hazel assured him that Makoto would be fine since he was the one who slayed the Ruby Eyes. After Morris backed up his claim, Makoto completed his aura farming by taking off his cape and assuring Patrick that he'd break the curse. Some minutes later, Makoto entered a room that had been massacred and noticed some of the ambrosia drug spilled on the floor, so he took a sample of it on a cloth. When they arrived at the wife's room, Makoto decided to lure her out using the smell of the drug, but his plan worked too well as the wife burst through her door to attack him. Makoto dodged her attacks and decided to stop her in a way that wouldn't injure her too much. When Patrick ran towards them, Makoto asked him to stand back and use judo moves to hold her down before asking him to administer the drug. When Patrick tried to hold her mouth steady, she bit his hand, but he still managed to pour the drug into her mouth and heal her from her illness. Makoto went into one of the daughters' rooms. When he activated his investigative Kai, he noticed one of them hanging from the corner of the room like a bootleg Spider-Man. She charged at him. He dodged her attack and held her down, allowing Patrick to pour the drug in her mouth. As Hazel ran towards them to hand over the final dose, the fool slipped again and hurled the drug into the air, but Morris caught it using some swift moves. When Makoto arrived at the second daughter's room, she attacked him, but he managed to hold her down long enough for Patrick to administer the drug. Soon after, Patrick thanked Makoto for his help and asked Makoto if he was a disciple of Goku, but Bro lied that he was simply a merchant in training. Makoto walked to the front gate where he met Mio and Tamo, but their conversation was interrupted when a mage tried to barbecue them with a flame spell. Makoto dodged the attack, and he worried for his girls, but they simply blew the attack away like a candle flame. When he asked why they didn't dodge, Tamo explained that they were trying to assess the assassin's strength because they noticed them following him ever since he left the inn. Just then, some more assassins showed up, and when their leader asked the girls to join them, Mio suddenly agreed. However, it was all part of Makoto's plan because he didn't want a repeat of the destruction at Satsuya, and Tamo laid waste to the assassin group with ease. When one of the leaders tried to escape using a teleportation spell, Makoto swatted him into the ground. The other leader, Saige's number 1 adventurer Lime, tried to attack them, but Tamo floored him in no time. When he was interrogated, Lime then told the gang how he was recruited by the witch doctor to use his cursed drug on Rembrandt's family, so they let him go. Afterwards, Lime apologized to Patrick and told him he was retiring from adventuring. Sometime later, Tamo met Lime at the orphanage he was taking care of, and gave him a katana before hiring him to become her personal spy. That evening, she heard Patrick plotting against Makoto, and this made her realize that he wasn't a good person. The next morning, Emma informed Makoto and the girls that their warriors had lost confidence in training with them because of the overwhelming power difference between them. When Mio suggested stopping training for a while, Tamo said they'd think they abandoned them, and the two idiots started bickering until Makoto asked them to stop. Makoto decided to see how his crew were doing, and Emma said it was a great idea but informed him that the orcs were taking a break. When he asked Tamo to talk to the lizardmen for him, she complained that it was a hassle, so Mio called her a lazy scumbag. In response, she asked Mio to go check on her Alk clan as well, but Mio claimed that the Alk weren't experiencing any dissatisfaction related to training. Makoto added that each individual elk was strong, but didn't train very much because they were busy with medicine production and alchemy. He then asked Mio to come with him, and she immediately agreed. They soon arrived at the forest where two orcs were talking, and Makoto used a version of his power called Listening Kai to eavesdrop on them while hiding. One of the orcs claimed that training with Mio and Tamo was fine because even though they can't damage them, they'd allow them to land an attack if they're good enough. However, he said Makoto was worse because he'd blast flame arrows before any of them could even get close, and roast those that resist the arrows either way. As they walked back, Makoto said he regretted not holding back during training runs, but Mio interrupted him to glaze the tomatoes she was eating. This made Makoto give her a full-blown lecture about tomatoes, which made her consider cooking up one of the dishes from Ratatouille. When Makoto asked Tamo how the lizardmen were doing, she said the situation was bad because they were less than 10% as strong as she'd hoped. Makoto then pointed out that the various species didn't exchange much info with each other, adding that it would be great if lizardmen and orcs imitated each other's fighting styles. When Tamo started trolling Emma, he explained that they should focus on improving their fighting tactics rather than hiding them, and this gave Tamo an idea. Sometime later, all the orcs and lizardmen were gathered in an arena, and Tamo announced each species' strongest warriors would fight to demonstrate their strength. However, Makoto realized that they were basically about to do bootleg Mortal Kombat. When it was time to start the tournament, Chibai Tamo announced that an orc named Agars would represent the Highland Orcs, while a lizard man named Liddy would represent the Mist Lizards. She then announced the start of the battle, so Liddy fired a breath attack at Agars, but the orc tanked the attack, so he attempted to slash him with a sword. However, Agars blocked his attack with a force field and struck the ground with so much force that the platform shattered. At first, Makoto freaked out, but when remembered that Tamo advised him to stay expressionless during the fight, he switched to a dull expression. Liddy then fired off one of Ong's biggest airbending moves, and it ripped through Agar's armor, creating an opportunity for him to charge at the orc again. Agars grabbed him and slammed him on the ground. Seeing this, Chibai Tamo stopped the fight and announced Agars as the winner of the fight, but Agars noticed that Makoto didn't look impressed. Tamo then stated that despite how hard they fought, they were both hopeless and asked why they weren't stronger than they currently were, when she pointed at an orc to answer the question. He said they fought well from his perspective, even though they didn't live up to her expectations. However, she loudly claimed that they were currently less than 10% as strong as she'd like, which made them a bunch of nobodies. This left them speechless, and Makoto whispered that she was being a bit too harsh, but she ignored him and said they needed warriors who were strong enough to depend on. She then admitted that their strength hadn't been appropriately measured, and announced that once every 7 days, everyone would participate in individual matches. In each match, they'd assess each individual's strength in order to rank them, and they'd run the idea by the Alk and Dwarves as well. When some orcs complained that they'd be revealing their tactics to each other, she called them fools and stated that they shouldn't worry about someone learning their tactics. When they handed the invisible microphone to Makoto, he said he agreed with everything Tamo said and revealed that he was planning to help them strengthen each other. Just when Makoto started thinking of a name for the tournament, Tamo announced that the Demoplane ranking was coming soon. Some hours later, the guild receptionist measured the rank of the girls and shrieked in fear as the ladies once again ranked over 1,000. She then asked Makoto for help in training new adventurers to become powerful, so he agreed to help in training Toa's party. When they returned to the Demoplane, he asked Tamo to train Toa's party, and she agreed because she knew how much he cared for Toa. However, she put them through the most hellish training imaginable and saved them from a gorilla attack before teaching them a strategy which helped them defeat the monsters. For the next stage of their test, she sent them to raid a den of monstrous gorillas on their own, and the receptionist thought it was impossible, but they succeeded. Some days later, Makoto asked Mio to look for some ambrosia flowers and revealed that he was starting a shop. A while later, he met up with Patrick and asked to rent one of his spaces to use for a shop, but Patrick figured out that Makoto was planning to use the space for espionage. However, he agreed to help him and directed him to a city where he could open his shop. In a forest somewhere, a lowly named heiress was ranting about some adventurers who dared to enter their woods. When she asked her partner, Aqua, if she unalived them, Aqua said they were still alive, but claimed that she'd have ended them if they touched the red lotuses. Back at the demoplane, the girls assessed Makoto using magic. Just then, Shibaitamo arrived and announced that everything was ready. Soon after, Makoto went on stage with Tamo and announced that they were throwing a party to celebrate the establishment of his new trading company. Their cheers made him feel shy, so he asked Tamo why she didn't handle the speaking like usual. But she replied that he was the one everyone wanted to hear speak. When Shibaitamo handed him a drink, he thanked her while patting her on the head, and this made the two versions of Tamo react weirdly. Mio then arrived with some food which she found in Sage, and she thought about feeding Makoto, but saw that he'd already started stuffing his face in it. When Tamo noticed that the people were staring anxiously at Makoto, she dragged Mio away to give him room to address them. Akina then arrived and reintroduced herself to Makoto before revealing that she'd learned to remain transformed for long periods of time. After handing him a book about ambrosia, she explained that they couldn't bring some back because of a species tending to the woods. Makoto said it was okay because he knew harvesting them carelessly would cause problems. She thanked him for helping the Alk settle and told him about how her Alk allies, including Haruna, Minato, and Hokuto, were all partaking in different constructive activities in the kingdom. After she left, Liddy approached Makoto and told him that he'd acquired new tactics through their joint training sessions, which allowed him to finally defeat Agares. Makoto was impressed by this, and he went further to say that he had been training with Tamo to prepare for the demoplane ranking in 3 months. This made Makoto worry that Tamo's influence was taking over the demoplane. Some hours later, Makoto had a drink with Baron, who asked him how Sage was, and he replied that it was a lively place. During their conversation, Makoto brought up the fact that Baron hadn't left the demoplane since arriving, and asked if he found it suffocating. However, Baron said he was extremely happy to be Makoto's craftsman, and Makoto replied that he was relieved to hear that. However, he claimed that he was curious to know the arms were popular outside of the demoplane, and because of this, Makoto asked him to run their shop in Sage. Baron was confused, so he explained that dwarves were known for being excellent blacksmiths, which meant that people would hire him to make weapons, and Baron happily accepted the offer. After Baron left, the orc who got healed by Makoto earlier came to see him, and revealed that he was assigned to the next shift of guiding adventurers to their illusory city. Makoto knew that the illusory city was a fictional city they invented to distribute products that only existed in the demoplane, so he apologized for making him do that for his business. However, the orc said it was fine and confessed that he always wanted to do something for him, causing everyone in the crowd to yell in support. In the forest, Mio told Tamo about the creatures guarding the ambrosia, but Tamo asked her not to include them in her report so that Makoto wouldn't be worried. Tamo then noticed that she couldn't sense Makoto nearby, and she guessed that he'd returned to his mansion, but suddenly their senses started tingling badly. When Mio started panicking, Tamo calmed her down by informing her that Makoto's presence had returned and asked her to accompany her in dealing with the issue at hand. They soon arrived at a spot in the forest where Makoto was practicing archery, and Mio immediately rushed to hug him. When he asked Tamo if they were under attack, she said they weren't, and asked if he was training with a bow. After he confirmed that he was, she angrily stated that he could have died countless times during his training, but Makoto was still confused by her words. She then asked him to explain his archery process, and while doing so, he revealed that extended his consciousness to the target and then reconstituted himself. With tears in her eyes, Mio told him people could only diffuse their consciousness when they die, which made his training sessions seem like he was unaliving himself. Tamo then pointed out that his mana was increasing at an absurd rate, and revealed that his constant death and rebirth during training was causing his mana to increase. She then revealed that his current mana output was on the level of the goddess, and added that his mana increase had caused the demiplane to expand. This was a problem because the goddess would make a move to eliminate him if she found out, so Tamo suggested getting an upgraded mana-absorbing armor. The next day, Makoto was walking through the city when a call girl started tempting him with her milk factories, but before Bro could fold, his monster girl duo dragged him away. When they returned to the inn, the girls tried to forcefully put his V-card in their envelopes, but he stopped them with an ice gate and escaped. The next day, Rugus gave him an upgraded version of the mana-suppressing rings, and Mio came by to apologize for her antics the previous night. When she mentioned the ambrosia flowers, Makoto asked her to accompany him to the forest to pick them, and she immediately agreed. They soon arrived at the ambrosia field in the forest, and walked around peacefully until Eris and Aqua showed up to confront them. Things got even more out of hand when some adventurers showed up to take the flowers for themselves. When the forest keepers started attacking them, Makoto protected himself and the adventurers using defensive kai. As they ran through the forest, Makoto suddenly heard a telepathic message from Tamo, who was watching the events unfold like a movie in a cinema. When he asked for her help, she refused because of his date with Mio, and he tried to deny her claims, but she brought up how he was holding hands with Mio earlier. He then gave her permission to pursue katana making and rice farming, and this made her so happy that she agreed to help him out. She asked him to create a smoke screen that would allow her to summon a mist gate, but Makoto feared that it would lead the enemy to their illusory city. However, Tamo said it was all part of her plan, and added that they could feed Mio some of her favorite food to bring her around. When Eris and Aqua got close, Makoto blasted some flames at the adventurers, which forced them into a portal, and cast an ice spell which he used to injure his hand. He then fed the blood to Mio, and she happily drank it like a vampire before thanking him for the delicious meal. The forest keepers were confused by the sus events they just witnessed, but they prepared for battle anyway. When Eris attempted to blast them with an ice spell, Mio consumed her mana with dark magic before she could even finish her incantation. Makoto then cast a light spell which temporarily blinded the enemy duo, allowing him to destroy both their wands with a flame spell, and afterwards, he asked Mio to tie them up. Meanwhile, the adventurers were trying to figure out where they were when Chibai Tamo showed up and welcomed them to the illusory city. At the same time, Makoto explained to the forest keeper girls that they came to talk and not steal their flowers, adding that he was a merchant who was interested in purchasing wares. The girls decided to take them to their village. Soon after, they arrived at the forest ogre village, and Makoto noticed that the entire village was surrounded by a concealing barrier which felt very familiar to him. As they walked ahead, Aqua explained that the barrier protects the red lotuses and their village, and asked Makoto to release their bonds so they could guide them to the elders. They eventually met up with a man named Nil, who was the chief of the elders, and when he welcomed them to the forest ogre village, Mio was surprised that they weren't elves. Nil explained that unlike the elves who drew their power from spirits, he and his people could only manage the forest using what they knew. Just then, Nil's son, Adono, arrived and said they weren't a different species from the elves. After exchanging greetings with Makoto, he explained that their species were the ancestors of the elves and they created the woods which the elves drew power from. Adono then scolded his dad for insisting they stay in the forest even though the dragon's barrier had weakened. But Makoto didn't understand what he meant by dragon barrier. When Makoto claimed that he and Mio were merchants, Adono asked how they managed to defeat Eris and Aqua. So he lied that he studied all of Rey Mysterio's best moves. Adono said he chose to believe them for the meantime, and after he walked away, Nil apologized for his edgelord son's rudeness. Later that evening, Aqua informed Makoto and Mio that they'd be holding a feast to apologize for the earlier harsh treatment and invited them to meet her master. However, Makoto was so spooked that he declined the offer, and Eris tried to talk him into it, but that only made him more creeped out. Just then, a weirdo named Mondo came bursting through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man and introduced himself as their master. While shaking hands with Makoto, he started saying sus things, so Mio got jealous and beat him up. While on the floor, he realized that neither Makoto nor Mio were ordinary humans, so he lit up a cigarette and decided that he'd make them regret meeting him. Meanwhile, Makoto instructed Mio to investigate Adono and Mando, and she gleefully agreed before teleporting away in a dark portal. As she observed them, she noticed that both men were acting weird, but had no idea that they were connected to the demons. When she reported her findings to Makoto, he asked her to swap with Tomo in the demoplane because he wanted to find out something. During the party that evening, a skeleton demon suddenly appeared and destroyed Mando and Adono. When Makoto approached him, he admitted that Makoto was the one he wanted, and Makoto figured out that he was a lick. When he tried to attack Makoto with a spell, he countered by absorbing the spell as well as the demon's aura, reducing him to a mere bag of bones. After Tomo teleported the demon away, she revealed herself to Nil and the orcs as the dragon who put up their barrier, and they all worshipped her. However, she told them to worship Makoto instead since he was her master, and this left them speechless. A while later, the Lick told Makoto that his plan was to become a Grant, which was a superior version of humans that could travel through worlds. However, Tomo said it was impossible because the real meaning of Grants were normal humans like Makoto's parents who successfully crossed over to another world. When Makoto asked if it was possible to travel through worlds, she said there was only a 10% chance of success even if they found a way. She then motivated the Lick to form a contract with Makoto, and both parties agreed to do so. After forming the contract, the Lick transformed into a handsome guy who was in his bathing suit, and after putting on a coat, he thanked Makoto for accepting him. Just then, Tomo's dragon senses went into overdrive, and everyone heard an explosion before she suddenly collapsed. As blood spilled from Tomo's face, Makoto wondered what was going on, and he asked Mio to stop the bleeding before telling Lick to accompany him to the explosion site. They ran to a spot in the forest where the Lick fell from exhaustion and explained that he couldn't run very well because he wasn't accustomed to flesh and blood. He added that it would be better to save his mana to heal the injured rather than to spend it getting there, and Makoto was surprised that the Lick could use healing magic. The Lick man said he was quite good at it, so Makoto asked him to perform a healing spell from the spot they were standing. Hearing this, the Lick man got up and activated a healing spell which led Makoto to a pig girl who was mourning an injured Hokuto. When he noticed that Hokuto wasn't breathing, he recognized the feeling from the time his dog died during his early years, and this made him terrified. The Lick then informed him that he'd healed everyone within the vicinity, and added that Hokuto was the most badly injured among them, which meant that he was still alive. This made Makoto feel relieved, but the Lick asked him to use his healing magic on Hokuto as well to support his healing magic. However, Makoto knew he could only heal people using his Kai, and when he activated his healing Kai field, it had zero effect on Hokuto. He felt useless for not knowing any healing magic, but then a light bulb appeared in his head as he realized that he could combine spells in order to perform healing magic. To do this, he cast a healing Kai field on top of the healing Kai that was already active, and this successfully brought Hokuto back to life. Afterwards, the pig girl gave him a necklace that belonged to an orc he knew, and directed him to a spot where the orc was trying to fight off the enemy humans. When Makoto arrived there, he saw the explosion markings on the ground, and wondered if the explosion happened to open the gate to Tsaij which they once opened before. He then sensed some adventures on the other side of the gate, as well as Tomo's fragment and the orc. When their consciousness suddenly vanished, he remembered Mio's words, and this made him so scared that he rushed to interrogate one of the adventurers. Immediately he reached into their consciousness. He heard a voice in his head which plotted against him, and he recognized her as one of the adventurers he met in the forest. He then saw several flashbacks, which showed the girl and her party stealing from their storehouse. When Chibai Tomo and the others tried to stop them, she threw Makoto's magical ring at them, and it immediately exploded. When the girl woke up, she was relieved that she survived the blast, But then she saw Makoto walking towards her looking like a horror villain. She couldn't understand what was going on, but Makoto explained with a vengeful look in his eyes that she managed to survive the blast thanks to Chubai Tamo's spell. As he approached her, she tried to keep him away, but he told her with a cold look in his eyes that he wished he'd unalived her instead. She then pulled out her sword and bragged about being a high-level adventurer. But that didn't scare him off as he pulled out his dagger and continued to walk towards her. When she charged at him, he blocked her attack and sliced off both her arms before she could even scream in pain. He kicked her to the ground and said her life stopped being important the minute she slayed the orc and Tamo's fragment. With tears and blood spilling from her, she begged him to stay away, but he stabbed her in the neck instead, causing her to bleed out and ultimately die. In that moment, Makoto realized that it was the first time he'd intentionally unalived someone, and suddenly tears started spilling from his eyes. He wondered if the reason was that he'd stained his hands with blood, or that he'd lost his friends. However, he cried even more, as he realized that the reason he was tearing up was because dying was sad in the world he used to live in. The next day, the people of the Demoplane mourned their fallen comrades, and Makoto acted normal during the funeral, even though he was drowning in guilt. Soon after, Makoto named the lick Shiki, and asked Tamo if their contract made him a form of hybrid that mixed all of their species into one. However, Shiki explained that no part of their contract entered his body, and Tamo added that he was able to use her memory control powers thanks to the bond they shared. Soon after, Makoto was informed by Haruna that Hokuto's injuries had improved, and he instructed them to take turns with the lizard men in protecting the illusory city. Afterwards, he met up with the dwarves and instructed them to manage the goods that are coming from Tsaij. He then visited the friend of the orc that passed, and apologized to him for letting his friend die. The next day, he was directed by Patrick to a city called Rothsgard for his business, and he showed them his true face in return for their kindness. During lunch, Makoto told everyone that he was going to an academy to learn more about their world and handed them some memories as a parting gift. Not long afterwards, he said goodbye to his people and left the Demoplane with Shiki. However, on his way to the academy, he was suddenly teleported by the goddess to a strange land where he was attacked by some warriors named Sophia and Mitsu. When he saw that Sophia's attack cut off his fingers, he realized that she was overpowered. As Makoto tried to calm himself down, Mitsu asked if he was a demi-human, but Sophia replied that the goddess would never choose one. When Makoto heard this, he realized that his current situation was the goddess doing, and he tried to communicate with his minions telepathically but got no response. Sophia thought he was ignoring them, so she charged at him again, and he managed to block her attacks with a Kai barrier. When Makoto noticed that his injury was more serious than it seemed, he tied his hand with a bowstring to reduce the bleeding, and this impressed Sophia. She asked if he was a human-based chimera, but Makoto angrily replied that he was a human before asking who they were. When he pointed out that he'd done nothing to them, Sophia explained that he was their enemy because they'd sided with the demons instead of the humans. Makoto couldn't understand what she was saying, but he spread his observation Kai around the area and found out that a war between demons and humans was about to go down. This made him wonder if he'd somehow gotten caught up in their war, and Mitsu stated that he was stopping the demons from advancing before asking Sophia to end him. When she approached him, Makoto decided to buy time, so he switched to the red mode of his gear, which made Mitsu realize that mana was converging in the area. Just then, Makoto fired a barrage of flame attacks at them, and while they blocked his attack, he activated his concealing Kai and tried to run away from the area. However, he noticed that a wall of blades had appeared behind him, and when he tried to run ahead, some blades kept popping up from the ground which impeded his motion. Sophia then asked Mitsu to create some footholds for her, and he did so by creating some swords in mid-air when she suddenly appeared behind him. Makoto managed to block her attack, but she shattered the barrier and delivered a brutal strike which pushed him back. Makoto was relieved because he knew things would have ended badly if he wasn't wearing the coat, and Sophia praised him for having insane physical attributes. She assumed that the goddess was protecting him, so she put on a ring to cancel the protection, but Makoto angrily said that he didn't receive protection from the trashy goddess. Hearing this, Mitsu argued by pointing out that he arrived in that location in a light that looked very similar to the goddess aura. Makoto said he had no clue about that and claimed that he didn't want to fight them, but they translated his words to mean that he was begging for his life. When they asked for his name, he asked them to introduce themselves first, so Mitsu introduced Sophia as the famous dragon slayer and himself as someone known as Lancer. This made him realize that Sophia was the strongest adventurer that the receptionist at Setsuya told him about, so he introduced himself as an ordinary merchant. However, Mitsu said he was lying, and Sophia declared that they'd slay him. When they prepared to attack him again, he activated his strengthening Kai to its full power, causing a wave of aura that blew them away. He then switched to Investigation Kai, which helped him locate them inside the smoke, and brought out a special blade. Afterwards, he created a flaming bow and arrow and used it to fire a shot at them. Sophia tried to evade the attack, but it suddenly split apart and blasted through both their defenses with ease. Makoto then created a bow and arrow with water, and when he blasted them, Mitsu tried to block with a water shield, but it destroyed the shield easily and froze him. When Sophia attacked Makoto again, he destroyed her sword using his special blade, so she hugged him in a way that pressed his face on her milk factories. This move wasn't just for cuddling's sake, as it held him in place for a sword barrage which Mitsu prepared for him, and she teleported him way up in the sky so that he'd fall on them. As he fell, he destroyed all the blades using fireballs and fired a massive water arrow which destroyed the entire area. When Makoto woke up, he realized that he was home at the demoplane, and then noticed that his two monster mommies were sleeping beside him. Sometime later, Makoto explained everything that happened to the others, and Shiki deduced that the goddess sent him there in an attempt to force him to fight against the demons. When he mentioned going to school again, the girls offered to follow him, but he refused because he wanted to protect them from the goddess. Tamo then introduced him to another fragment of herself, which he named Kamo because of how small she was. Sometime later, Makoto's store officially opened in Sage, and they immediately showed off how next level they were during their first marketing campaign. As they watched everyone have fun, Makoto thought about how his outburst of mana on the battlefield caused a number of deaths. That evening, he sat alone on a field thinking about everyone he loved in the human realm, and he decided to do his best to become less of a fraud. Just then, Emma came to call him for a farewell party that everyone was throwing for him, and immediately he saw her, he remembered how he met everyone. When he arrived at the party, the sight of everyone enjoying themselves made him thankful for being isekai'd. But he changed his mind when he saw the girls fighting again. If you were Makoto, which isekai girl would you shove your sacred arrow inside first? Tamo? Mio? Or maybe he'd go wild and clap the goddess cheeks? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. That's all for today's video. If you like anime recaps like this, check out this video here.